So here's the thing. Recently, I've been questioning some assumptions I've made about myself. I mean, I'm queer and neurodivergent, so maybe that's par for the course. But today I'm talking about my feelings on the genre of horror. If you were to ask me what my favourite genres are, whether in books or in films, I would probably list sci-fi, fantasy, murder mystery, crime thriller, comedy, musicals, satire, these sorts of things. And I probably wouldn't mention horror. And certainly compared to someone who watches horror regularly and habitually, someone who's passionate about horror, I guess I'm not really that big of a horror fan. But one of my all-time favourite books is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And one of my all-time favourite films is The Wicker Man, the 1970s version, I hasten to add. I'm also passionate about classic cinema, and in exploring that, I have seen a lot of, say, the Universal classic monster movies. I've seen some Hammer horror, that sort of thing. And recently I read Annihilation for the first time, which, while it's, I suppose, a sci-fi book, I would class it as a horror as well. And I think horror, like some of my other favourite genres, sci-fi and fantasy, is able to explore quite deep and profound topics through the lens of its genre, through the kind of genre trappings. It can kind of abstract these themes and explore them in a way that is not necessarily tied directly to our real-world experience, but which we then tie it back ourselves. And that can be a really rich and rewarding experience. I really find that with a lot of the sci-fi and fantasy that I read, and frankly, I find that with horror as well. So if it's possible for me to love these horror books and films as much as I do, then why don't I include horror in my list of go-to genres along with sci-fi, fantasy, murder mystery, crime thriller, and comedy? Well, I guess for one thing, it's just the consistency with which I go to that genre. It's not one that I regularly read or watch, but recently I've been delving into it a bit more, especially in films, and having a really great time. I don't know why I shy away from it. Okay, actually no, I do know why I shy away from it, but I'm realizing now that I have been wrong to do so. So with all that said, why exactly have I been shying away from horror? Well, I think that it comes down to anxiety. I am naturally quite a nervous and anxious person, and I think that has made me trepidatious to explore horror because I was worried that it might provoke and trigger my anxiety. However, I love dissonant, weird, experimental music, the kind of stuff that maybe makes the listener a little bit uncomfortable. I actually find that kind of comforting, kind of reassuring, because it expresses the kind of inner turmoil I feel. There's a sort of relief in knowing that someone else has felt that way and has found a way to put that into art. And surely horror does the same thing. In fact, I was discussing this very thing on my social media, and my friend Mara made a really insightful comment. She said that a lot of people with anxiety actually find horror therapeutic. It can give your anxiety and your tension a focus that is outside of yourself. And it enables you to explore that feeling in a kind of safe venue. You are in control of whether you keep reading the book, whether you keep watching the film. You have the option to turn it off and get out of that situation if you need to. And sure enough, I have found that although watching horror films recently has made me tense and anxious during the film, that anxiety has not overstepped the bounds of the film itself. Once it's over, I am able to release that anxiety, and it is proving quite beneficial in just giving me kind of another outlet for it. So it turns out that actually, rather than anxiety being something that that makes me shy away from horror, perhaps I should be looking at it as anxiety being something that draws me towards horror. On a side note, because this is usually a bookish channel, I would like to just point out that my friend Mara has written a book. It's a feminist retelling of ancient myths, and it's called Ancient Myths and Legends Without Men. I haven't actually read it yet, so I can't tell you any more about it than that, but seeing as Mara's a friend of mine, I thought I would mention it. Anyway, back to the horror. In recent weeks, I have watched several horror films, and for the most part, had a really rewarding time. For starters, I've been revisiting the works of David Lynch, someone that I am somewhat familiar with and have kind of enjoyed his work before, but somehow recently it's just clicked with me and I've got really into it. I started rewatching the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks over the last couple of months, and that led me to also watching Eraserhead and Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I had seen Eraserhead before, but that was great to revisit. It's such a strange and unique film, and yeah, Fire Walk with Me was an incredibly intense and quite moving experience. Now, I'm not sure I would class these as purely horror films. I think Lynch is quite a multifaceted director, hard to kind of pin down apart from, I suppose, describing him as Lynchian. That's, I suppose, why that adjective even exists. But it's definitely horror adjacent, at least, and there are certainly some very intense and anxiety-inducing moments in those films. And yeah, they were both really intriguing and powerful viewing experiences. And as you may have guessed from the intro, I also watched John Carpenter's The Thing. Now, that I think is the most typically horror of the films that I've watched recently. And yeah, again, it was quite an intense experience. It's a very tense film full of quite a lot of quiet ramping up of tension, which then suddenly kind of explodes into some really shocking imagery, which is the special effects are just incredible. I mean, this is a 40-something-year-old film, and the practical special effects are so much more effective and scary and memorable, frankly, than any amount of CGI weirdness. I think the fact that all of these things are tangible objects that were actually filmed on a camera and the actors were reacting to them in the moment, it gives it so much more potency than people just reacting to ping pong balls on sticks. I did also watch The Witch, or The Vivitch, but yeah, I have to say I didn't enjoy that one as much. But still, 3 out of 4 in the last few months is pretty good going for horror. So I'm not going to let that deter me from exploring the genre even more. So what's next, I hear you ask? I mean, I don't actually hear you. This is just me talking to a camera. But, you know, I would hear you if this was actually a conversation. Anyway, what is next is, for starters, probably more horror films. I do have a few more in my collection that I've been meaning to get around to, and now that I have finally kind of found my way into horror and accepted to myself that I actually do like the genre, hopefully it won't take too much longer for me to get around to watching them. But also, I would like to start exploring more horror books. Top of my priority list for horror reading is a book called Spread Me by Sarah Gailey. I have heard both Brian the Bookish Texan and Lecton from Reading from the Depths talk about Sarah Gailey with great enthusiasm, and Lecton directly recommended Spread Me because I was talking to him about getting more into horror, because I know that that is one of his go-to genres, and he recommended Spread Me specifically because it has ties to The Thing, and also he promised some Lynchian weirdness. So I'm hoping that Spread Me is going to be right up my street. But apart from that, I'm not really sure where to go next for horror books. I mean, Stephen King seems like an obvious place to go, and I've never read any Stephen King. I think his novels tend to be quite a bit longer than I would normally prefer, but I am still tempted to try one, and I'm thinking probably The Shining is a good place to start. I've recently heard Pat from Book Chat with Pat talk about it. She read it in a buddy read with Lecton and also with Alan from Alan's Reads. And it sounds like they all had a great time with that book. So, yeah, that's definitely kind of nudging its way up the priority list as well. But I would love to hear some recommendations from you. So if you have any horror novels that you think I would really get on with, then I'd love to hear in the comments what they are. I have read a fair number of the really classics. So Frankenstein and Dracula, yes, I have read those. But apart from like Shirley Jackson, I've not read a great deal of horror books. I've certainly seen quite a few horror films, not like loads and loads, but I think I have a better grounding in horror films than I do horror books. So I expect most of what you recommend in terms of books, I probably won't be that familiar with. The bit at the end. So those are my rambling thoughts on the genre of horror. But how about you? I'd love to hear in the comments if you have any particular books or films that you would recommend. Are you a fan of horror, or like me, are you a bit of a nervous Nellie? But that's about it from me today. I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you if you say my name 3 times into a mirror.